This is the Strategic Hotbox Real with Dr. Brandi Luv Stankovic, remixing your favorite episodes and moments and giving you the tools to achieve greatness. It's time to kick some
Welcome to the Strategic Hotbox. It's your girl, Brandi Stankovic, and today we're going to talk about one of my favorite topics, and of course, it's down the path of leadership. I'm sure you're not surprised in that realm, but really, it's down the path of nature versus nurture, education or experience. About burnout and avoiding burnout. So it is all about persuasion. As a matter of fact, the title is Power of Persuasion. Let's get started. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Farzin Madjidi. Tell us a little bit about your journey in leadership.
Well, I never saw myself as a leader when I started out. I always, as a second child, an underachieving second child to a superstar, firstborn, I just wanted to be in the shadows. And life doesn't sometimes allow you to do that. So I found myself in situations where I had two options: complain or do something about it. And then I learned to do something about it. And that's how my journey began.
Oh, that's amazing. And so so really your journey and some of that began all the way before you even thought about the term leadership. Before
I even knew the term at all, yes.
Wow. And what gave you that hunger for growth in that way?
As a person, I studied engineering and I studied systems, and I would see how systems can improve the conditions so everybody could excel. And I would find myself unhappy with the level of discontent and acrimony in organizations as an engineer. And my part of the wiring that you talked about in terms of nature for me was to do something about it. So I would volunteer, I would step up, I would offer help and offer free time. And people often say yes to when you offer free time.
Yeah, right.
To get my hands dirty.
Get the experience. Yeah, smart. And so I want to give you a formal introduction. This is Josh Allison. He's the founder and chief ideator of Think Cafe. Hello, Josh. Hi.
Great to be with you. Thank you for having me on the podcast.
Is your beard on your resume too?
Yes, it is. It's at the very, very top.
It's just a picture of it. Just if I were to look back into my career and you said train wreck, and I just relate to that, I'm sure people kind of giggled that are listening to us today about the fact that there are things that happen in life that end up making us stronger that become, those train wrecks that we look back on. And you wonder if had given the information, would you have taken, a different path? What obstacles have you encountered that others with maybe a degree wouldn't have?
But some of the obstacles have to do with kind of hiding the fact early on that I didn't have the education, and kind of keeping that in the background so that people would just assume that I do have an education. Right. But that taught me something, and it taught me that it's less valuable than we think. And the reason that is because people just assume you have one. And when people just start making that assumption, it tells you about the value of that degree.
Or how amazing you are.
No, I don't think that's the answer.
It definitely speaks to confidence of if you can walk the talk and not even necessarily have had some of the background to be able to just jump in and go.
Well, I think that's what I found. I found that walking the talk has very little to do with formal education. And early on, I kind of was scratching my head thinking, what am I missing out on in that process with the college education that I can't bring to the workplace? What are they bringing that I can't, and how do I make up for that, right? And I don't know what I don't know because I went to college, really. I never really experienced it. So what I started to do, I just started to look at the people around me that were the most successful in my life, and I wanted to just emulate their behavior. And when I started emulating behavior, what I noticed was the people, regardless of who I'm interacting with, the people who are most successful I engage, they do 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 things consistently.
And we've got a very special guest named Michael Veltri that'll be joining us here in just a second. Burnout tends to happen with those that are the highest performers, does it not?
Yeah. So one thing I can offer, right, is most of the high performers, myself included, and probably yourself, right, weren't good at delegating. And I know, as my time in corporate America, what got me to a certain level, what got me here won't get me there. And in other words, I think for high potentials, successful people, learning to delegate and let go instead of having one Michael Veltri, one burned out Michael Veltri. How can I be a leader and train, grow, and develop a team of 10, 20, 200, 3,000 empowered Michael Veltris that can do just as a phenomenal job? And I think that's what ultimately leads to the burnout, is we put so much pressure on ourselves to do everything at work, at home, in our community, that you finally reach that breaking point because you don't know how to delegate, because you've been really good, because we know that person's not going to do it as good as we can, and we don't want to let go and have them screw it up.
He is the guy. Mr. Persuasion is with us here today. Hello, Jeff. How are you?
Hey, Dr. Brandi, I'm fantastic. When I look at persuasion and really drill down, and we can talk a little bit about how it's similar to manipulation and how it's different. But when I drill down to what persuasion really is at its essence, I think it's leadership. I think it's seeing a better future, a different outcome, a better outcome, and then being able to bring people along in the journey.
Yes. And so really persuasion and using persuasive communication is part of it's ingrained in leadership.
I totally believe it is. And especially as we look at exactly what persuasion means and what manipulation means, I do think it's leadership. And I think, especially as people maybe are in sales or they're having to develop revenue, when you make a mindset shift to understand what persuasion really is, at least from my perspective, it sets us free to go out there and to make things happen.
Yeah, it really does. And so you started dabbling in it. Is there a difference between persuasion and manipulation?
Absolutely. And for me, I learned the difference when I was adopting a baby from the country of Haiti. And I was in a mode where I was always able to make things happen. And through some different things that happened, I just fell flat on my face. And I began to understand at that point exactly what manipulation and persuasion is. And they're both about moving people or affecting situations. But manipulation means this. It means to control or to influence a person or situation, but to do it cleverly, to do it unfairly. And what happens in manipulation, kind of like the example you just gave, in manipulation, we are seeking change. We're looking for a different behavior, but we're looking at it for our own self-interest. That's the big difference. Now, persuasion, contrast, is the same thing as to call someone to do something, but it's to do it through reasoning or argument. Now, when I use the word argument here, let me be very careful, because sometimes people think that's what we do at our tables at Thanksgiving and Christmas as we talk about politics and religion. I'm not talking about that whatsoever. I'm talking about listening to the other person's perspective, what's important to them, where the gaps are, what that person's need is. And then over time, especially through sustained effort and having provided sound reasoning, what happens at that point then is we have persuaded them because they see it for themselves just as much as we see it.
Leadership in general is something that impacts every single person, I believe, in any capacity. So even if you don't have a traditional leadership role, maybe there isn't leadership in your title, there isn't a vice president or a president or a director or some sort of fanciness in the title that in your organization, that doesn't matter. If you're a person that influences others at home, if you're the person that influences others at work or at school or just in your home, in your community, in the things that you do in your extracurricular, then you're a leader. You might have some of these skills, and some of them might be innate. Some you might have built up through time. And so where did that all come from? And I love to dig into this topic, and maybe it's late night over way too many shots of Jägermeister, or maybe it's, when I figure something out and think, wow, how does that person have that particular skill? Or I see some leadership in action. Or maybe it's just being drawn to a particular leader, or being drawn to somebody's dance moves out, on the dance floor, whatever it is. I'm drawn to people's leadership skills in so many different capacities that I often find myself thinking through this topic. And what do you think? Is a person born with, or is leadership learned?
As you know, I also teach a little bit of economics. And in economics, every time I'm asked the question, the standard answer is, well, it depends. On the one hand, yes. On the other hand, no. In leadership, the answer is very different. The answer is always yes. Are leaders born or trained? Yes.
Yes. Okay. Yes. Okay. Yes.
Yes.
And as a leader, we have to have continual education. We have to have continual learning, and actually drive forward in wanting that learning, more than just kind of providing knowledge or being a lecturer of your staff. It's really about creating growth and evolving and raising your own potential and bar throughout your life. Because so often when we're young, we focus on learning and education, and as we progress as adults, we do it because we have to, because there's that new regulatory update, or here comes HR again with those courses we have to take, or anything like that. And rarely do we go out and really actively seek ways that we can get better, or things that we want to dive into. It's a lot harder to learn as an adult than it was as a young person or as a kid. But that doesn't mean it's not as important, or even more important today, especially as we're leading big organizations. Because you're right. It doesn't matter what kind of leader you are, educated or not, that there are going to be things that are similar, a bunch of people that are hungry for growth. So what motivational pieces, or what are the best way that those that may not have a formal education do to kick ass?
Thank you for asking. First off, say thank you. I think thank you, gratitude, expressing appreciation goes a really long way. And when we get people in our lives who will invest in your life, and you can express gratitude back to them, that has a crazy return on investment. And so a couple of things that I have done, and I suggest other professionals, and especially young professionals, do, is number one, get mentors. Find a mentor that can help you along your path. Mm-hmm. I made a lot of mistakes. I still make mistakes all the time. But one of the things I did right was I found people who were willing to be honest with me and say, hey, Josh, here's what I'm seeing from my perspective on how you're doing in the workplace. Here's how you're doing personally as well, right? So get mentors, right? And get mentors that are willing to speak into your life. It's what's amazing about mentorship, and I found this over the last 12, 14 years, is people who are passionate about what they're doing, who are successful. If you reach out to those people, most often they'll share their success strategies with you. Mm-hmm. Why? Because they're passionate about it. Yeah, they're excited about the work they've done. And so one of the things I did is I started looking at people who I wanted to be like. I'm like, okay, I don't got the degree, but maybe I'll go reach out to these people, speakers, consultants, and credit union executives that I want to and pursue. And I'll just ask them how they did it. Mm-hmm. And what I found was no one ever said no. I would reach out and I would say, hey, I respect and admire X, Y, and Z. How'd you do that? May I have a few minutes of your time to learn about that? In 14 or 15 years of actively seeking out mentors, I've had one person who blew me off. Wow. Every other person was willing to take the time. Every other person. And so that's powerful.
It is powerful.
Think about the fact, and I've spoken with dozens of people who are busy. Some are best-selling authors. I mean, they're the most incredible people. And I said, hey, I respect what you're doing. I want to learn a little bit about it. And so you'd be surprised how many people will let you into their role.
And I don't know about you, but there's definitely been moments in my life where I have felt that, like after a long week or after a really hard day or one of those meetings, whether it's performance related or working with a particular client or anything like that. And as leaders, we often can feel that way, can feel overwhelmed. And I mean, honestly, that's where that cliche TGIF came from, right? I mean, why else would you be happy that it's Friday if you weren't, kind of over your work week? And I think that what we have to do as leaders is be able to move past that. So you might feel a little overwhelmed by a day or just done with a day, but not making it have an impact or a long-term effect. An estimated $125 to $190 billion in healthcare are spent each year due to occupational burnout. Can you believe that? Those are a lot of dollars that are spent on burnout. And the most at-risk kind of demographic for burnout in the employee segment are your high-performing, are your highly engaged leaders. And it's just their level of dedication, their push for success and meeting goals really can come to taking things a little too far. And in this world of never really having an off moment, we sometimes can be a little too engaged there. And being in leadership in the Marines and being in leadership in corporate America and even in your home or family or personal, those are all, you're dealing with all sorts of different types of leaders, are you not?
Absolutely. And what I learned the hard way, right, is I'm able to talk about this because from all the mistakes I made. So in the military, it was that top-down leadership, do what I say. And even though I was working for some amazing leaders, if I was ordered to do something, it doesn't mean I had to do it very well, as long as I got it taken care of. And in corporate America, that doesn't really work that well. You have to really, I had to really learn how to grow as a leader, so people are doing things that you ask them to do because they want to, not because you tell them to do that. And it was a big transition, of course. And along the way, right, I had burned out because I was putting the most pressure on myself. And I looked at, why am I burning out? What's going on here? Something I love to do, whether that was starting my own businesses or my time in corporate America, and what can I do to avoid that?
But when I was thinking about Persuasion and thinking about preparing for this episode and preparing to talk to Jeff, I was thinking about Persuasion and influence in my life and thinking about back in the T-Shots days. And for those friends that are listening and have a relationship with T-Shots as well, then you remember these days with the jukebox. For anybody that doesn't know about T-Shots, it is a small dive bar that I don't believe is in existence any longer. But it was a dive bar that I spent much of my life. Much of my life. We don't have to go into details about how much time, but a good portion of my 20s was spent at T-Shots right up the street from my house at the time. And I made a lot of persuasive moments and speeches there to friends to make some poor life choices of their own there with me. But the persuasive techniques and communication that I used there certainly set me on this path of inspiring others to do things. And I think about how persuasive I was in that moment of my life. So in all seriousness, how good I was at inspiring people to do things back then. And then how bad I am at inspiring my children in persuading them to do things in my #mom life now. And, in the 10 years that have gone by, 15 years that have gone by, and getting them to do the simplest things like put their shoes on so we can get out the door on time. And that's me slamming my fist on the table here. But it's so difficult and why I'm unable to do it in those moments. And then thinking about how in career progression and how I'm able in work from time to time motivate people to be the best that they can be and what techniques are used in that different avenue. And just thinking about how persuasive communication applies across the board in so many different places. And I talk to, when I work with executive CEOs, about just managing their boards or their bosses and managing the relationships they have with the people above them, to work with their own communication styles to make it their boss's idea. So if they have a vision, if they have an idea of the end result, the outcomes that they want, to work and to listen and to frame conversations so it ends up feeling like not only are you getting buy-in, but it feels like the person's idea that you're talking to. And that really is persuasion in kind of the sense that you were sharing.
Absolutely. So 2 points on that, Dr. Brandi. First of all, when I'm negotiating a contract with a potential client, or if I am working with a speakers bureau, or if I'm working with a meeting planner, I look for 2 magical words when I wrap up to know if I have manipulated or if I have persuaded. And those 2 words are, that's right. So when the client looks at me and says some form of this and says, hey, Jeff, that's right. Your company can fix this problem we have. Your company can provide a solution. Or, hey, Jeff, you're right. That's right. You're the right person to be on stage for us. You can fix the problems that our association has. You can bring solutions to the table. At that point, they want it just as much as I want it, just like the illustration you just gave in working like with boards and so forth. When they accept it for themselves and they see the value for themselves, then they're there and they're just as excited as we are about it.
So let me break it down into born with it and learned over time. So in the born with it aspect, let's take an example of Michael Phelps. Most people listening will know, or watching will know, Michael Phelps. He obviously is a massively successful Olympian, won 28 medals, and he has been just forging the way in what he does in swimming. And would he be so amazing at swimming if he wasn't the beast of a man that he is, right? He's 6'4", but he's also has a wingspan, as many of you know, of 7 feet, right? So his arms extend a tremendous amount, and his inseam is only 32 inches. Right. So think about that. So I don't know exactly how that translates into meters and things, but wait a minute. I'm getting some notes from the people in the production studio of where I was going with that, those dirty minds. But no, the inseam at 32 inches, I have a 32-inch inseam and I'm only 5'9", and he's 6'4" and has a 32-inch inseam. So the body is shaped in the fact that he's got a very long torso. So he's a very large man, very long arms, and he can swim in that way. So now, mind you, has his born with it, his genetics impacted his ability to be that level of Olympian? I venture to guess yes. So does our genetics impact our abilities? Sure it does, right? Sure it does. On the flip side, let's take the learned over time component of that. Now, my husband is 6'6" and also has a 32-inch inseam. And I tell him, I'm like, you missed your calling in swimming, right? And he just didn't go down a swimming path and didn't obviously have the same path that Michael Phelps did. And yet, has similar genetics as far as body type, right? So here's maybe similar genetics, but different experiences or environment and completely different stories and paths in regards to the outcome. And so obviously Michael Phelps's environment or path impacted his success and hunger and his drive and everything that went into his coaching, his everything. So in that aspect, almost like his learned over time or his environment or his nurture impacted him greater than his genetics, although it's impossible to say that he couldn't have done it without.
I have no claim to any achievement in the field, but I studied martial arts all my life. I can proudly say, with all honesty and no modesty, that I was the single worst student in every class that I ever attended. I just was not meant to do the splits or even come remotely close to it.
Right.
But I was able to learn enough to be successful at it. I hold a brown belt, and if I hadn't crushed my elbow in an accident on a mat, I would have probably been able to achieve a black belt. Mm-hmm. Would I have ever achieved being Bruce Lee? Probably not. Mm-hmm. That's a rare combination.
Sure.
But would I be able to achieve some level of mastery that's consistent with the full abilities that I could put out, with how I was put together? I think so. Mm-hmm. And I think that as a goal in leadership, in life, in everything else, is something you can have some talent for, mm-hmm. and also through training achieve fully.
Can you share a funny story of your challenges or something that's happened along the way?
I got one more. This is kind of outrageous, but so I was on the road traveling a lot. And my wife thought, okay, well, my husband send him some sexy pics, right? So my wife sent me some really sexy pics, and I had them on my phone. Again, come on, guys, listen to this advice. Don't do what I'm doing. So I had them on my phone, traveling, beautiful wife. Yeah, my wife's hot. So I go for my wife's birthday. I go to Walmart to get some family portraits made at the printable kiosks, and I plug my phone in to the kiosk, right, and it starts uploading all of my pictures to the kiosk.
Oh no.
And the guy is helping me, and literally just a roll of all of my wife's pictures pop up on the screen. Meanwhile, I have my 7-year-old son with me. That's cool.
No.
I look to my left at the guy, the Walmart employee. He looks at me like, this is the best day ever. I grab the USB port like out of the kiosk, and I just grab my son and I just walk out the door. I'm pretty sure the pictures were still in there.
Yeah, I was gonna say, were they left on the kid? The guy's like, print.
So then I'm still trying to get like the family portraits made. So I can't go back to that Walmart. So I drove across town and got them done with the other one.
Oh my gosh! And now your wife's cheeks may be pink over this, but I'm sure she remembers the moment. Oh man, I can't imagine that.
I was like, hey, honey, guess what happened today?
Oh, I'd kill you if that was
another day at the Allison.
Let's head out to our shout out.
Hi, I'm Simon. I'm studying management in Mexico City, and you're listening to Brandi's Strategic Hotbox.
Hi, I'm Kelly Haggeter. My little peanut and I like to listen to Brandi on the Strategic Hotbox.
Hi, I'm Tara Ruther from Tempe, Arizona, and I no longer have a poor, long commute to work because of the Strategic Hotbox. I have a kick-ass commute to work.
So let's move into, it's my favorite time. It's time to kick some ass. Number one is to develop a learning vision. Where do you want to be? What do you want to learn? What good level do you want to be at? Good level. Yeah, that's a super sophisticated term. That's what all that education did for me. What good level do you want to be at? What level do you want to progress to? How do you want to where do you see yourself in the future? And what does that vision look like? Tony Robbins speaks to a lot of the things that Josh said today, as far as he found people that were successful and he was emulating that success. And that was definitely one of the takeaways from Josh. And having that vision of where you want to be can help drive what that learning might look like. Number two, drive that hunger. Just in the story that I was sharing with you about Africa and my kids, and is experience need to be organic or can it be intentional? Whatever you can do to create urgency in your hunger and your leadership and not let other people blow out the flame of your success. Get out there and push and keep pushing every single day. Number three is to obliterate the results, just like that Harvard Business Review study, just like the things that Josh was sharing with us about humble grit. You've got to be able to just get in there and make it happen and drive for success. Don't drive for average. Don't drive for mediocre. Don't wake up in the morning and think, I'm just going to live a mediocre day today and just go to work and just move. We want to be able to go after things and obliterate results. Two is to know your shit. You gotta know your shit. And I think that Jeff talked about it in the frame of your onlyness. He talked about knowing your skills, being that subject matter expert. I love that. You have to know your shit. If you want people to understand and be persuaded to, whether it's to buy your product, to buy you as your brand, to be influenced by the things that you're doing, then be and be a part of knowing what it is that you're doing. So being passionate about it, as well as being an expert in whatever that field is. And number five, burn bright. Don't burn out. You don't have to burn out. That isn't something that everybody has to feel. If you want to be there, remember the why. Remember your purpose. Remember why you began doing what you're doing to begin with. Refresh in that and give yourself a chance to relax. And that will include limiting all of the other distractions and things that are pulling you away. There's your top five kick-ass. And I love digging into topics like that. So thank you to all of you that have submitted to us topics that you'd like to hear from us and tackle on the Hotbox. And if you do have something top of mind that you want to send our way, you can email us, podcast@strategichotbox.com, or head out to the website, strategichotbox.com, and submit something there. And of course, we're on social media. I'd love to see you on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram at Brandi Luv, that's BRANDILUV, or at Strategic Hotbox. And so until I see you again, you better get out there and kick some ass, or I'm going to come find you. See you soon.